He's one of the most loved, respected, and influential spiritual leaders across the globe. But now the Dalai Lama is in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. I'm Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo story. This image, now gone viral, has shocked the Dalai Lama's supporters. In a video that has now been seen millions of times, the Dalai Lama is heard and seen telling a young boy to quote unquote suck my tongue. After the outrage, the Dalai Lama apologized, but his supporters have said that this was quote unquote innocent and playful banter, and that those who are looking to sexualize this video are getting it wrong. But child rights activists in particular are up in arms. They speak about possible trauma to what this young boy has just experienced. In the videos and pictures we are showing, we have hidden the identity of this young boy. But on social media, his face has actually been seen by millions around the world. The Dalai Lama is 87 years old. He leads a government in exile here in India. This is a point at which India is at a standoff, an unprecedented standoff with China. The implications are many. The personal is truly the political. And of course, there is at the heart of this what that young child may be going through today, or may not go through today, may go through later when he's old enough to look back at this incident through a different lens. To talk about what's happened, and it's painful because so many of us, me included, have admired, loved, and respected the Dalai Lama. Let me bring up our guests on the program today. Joining us is India's foremost child rights activist, Professor Shanta Sinha. It's a pleasure to have you with us, ma'am. Also joining us is child rights activist Pooja Taparia, who's, of course, with the Arpan Foundation. Good to see you, Pooja. Joining us today is Tibetan activist, a champion for the rights of the Tibetan community, Tenzin Sundu. It's always good to see you, Tenzin. Also joining us is a veteran editor, foreign affairs correspondent, and trenchant commentator on all things contemporary, Padma Rao. And finally joining us is Yashovardhan Azad, who's, of course, a veteran police officer. And remember, there are legal dimensions to this, depending on what the family or the parents of the child do decide to do. Before we get started, I'm just going to play out for the panel and for our audience, for anyone who might have missed this, the 40-second clip that was actually posted by the charity foundation, the representatives of which were attending this particular congregation. Do watch and listen in, and we'll talk after that.
Yeah. Then I think finally here also. And suck my tongue. Thank you. Thank you.
The Dalai Lama laughs, the audience applauds. Shanta Sinha, when you watched that clip, as so many of us did, what is the first thing that you thought, ma'am?
It actually violated my sensibilities, and especially I think coming from a person, as you just said, who had won over so many of us, and I had also an admiration for him. This was the most shocking and appalling kind of a video that I had witnessed. So I think the act itself is abusive. It is a sexual child sexual abuse. There is undoubtedly it has to be defined as such, and it's very, very shocking. It cannot be, in fact, confused with other issues of international diplomatic national other issues. It has to be looked at from the child's point of view and child centered. And again, as you say, even if the subjective feeling of the child today is not as intense as we are feeling, I think we will have to look at the act per se and condemn it fully.
Yes, I just want to clarify that I wasn't sort of condoning anything by looking at it through a geopolitical prism. I was extremely disturbed, and even just watching the video right now was highly disturbing. It's just a disturbing video to watch. And Shanta Sinha, you have called it out. It is child sexual abuse. The reason I mentioned this is that the reason I mentioned the geopolitics is that a number of supporters of the Dalai Lama are saying that if we criticize him any further, it will only embolden his critics. But I think you're making the correct point that child rights activists, that the child, the family, people who care about safe spaces for children cannot be concerned with the geopolitical consequences. We have to look at what's happening here on tape. But I have a follow up question. You said this is child sexual abuse. The Dalai Lama, in his statement, has regretted the act but has called it innocent and playful banter, thereby talking to intent, thereby referencing his intent, that the intention was not to abuse the child. What did you make of that statement or that apology?
That was the worst, I should think. It trivializes the entire act, and that there was no remorse, there was no regret, and that it was seen as an innocent, playful act with everybody applauding over it. I mean, it tells so much about how little care they have for what children are about. I think even that apology was hardly an apology. In fact, he said he may have hurt the child, which means that if the child was not hurt, this was okay. I found it totally unacceptable, and I think it has to be condemned by every human being who respects the other human being. It's an act of power. It's an act of abuse, and I think it just cannot be accepted. It has to be condemned.
Thank you for being so unambiguous. I think with the Dalai Lama, a lot of people have found it very difficult to take a position on what's happened because of the love and the respect that he's historically enjoyed among millions of Indians. I just want Pooja to bring in a perspective here, and then I'll open it up for everybody. Pooja, Shanta Sinha, of course, I think sets the framework for our conversation. We don't care if China exploits this. We don't care what the geopolitical implications of this are. We need to remain focused on the child. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I totally agree with that because uh, I don't think we're talking about the impact on the child enough. And I think those conversations need to be highlighted, that what could the child have felt. And even in the video, when I saw it for the first time, I could see the hesitancy on the child and also the helplessness in some way, right? You have this very powerful, adored, revered person, and one can see the hesitancy, but yet, you don't know what to do. And I think that's the reality for so many millions of children who get abused on a daily basis, right? Because most of them, being young, are usually in positions of helplessness, because the person abusing them is in a more powerful position, be it a elderly person, and any adult, who could be a caregiver or a neighbor or anybody. And I think we really need to condemn this in a significant manner, because what has happened is really unacceptable. We look up to our leaders, all our world leaders, no matter from which discipline they are. For them to do something like this is very shocking and painful.
Pooja, before I open this up, a brief question to you. The child has not spoken. The child can't, the child is a minor. If the child speaks, it would have to be to an expert or to an NGO or to the police. But the child is a young kid. The
Hmm.
family has not spoken. There are those who will say, if the family doesn't have a problem, why do all of you have a problem? I'm asking this because there will be people who will talk like this and they'll think like this, and I want you to respond to that.
Irrespective of what the child could be thinking about it, or the family, I think it's important to call and act what it is. An apple is an apple, an orange is an orange, and there's no two ways about it. The fact that he stuck out his tongue and asked the child to suck it is an act of sexual abuse. There's no two ways about it. And I know that people who follow him might not be able to accept it. And that we've seen in the past with a lot of other world leaders as well, when they've come under the radar or have been condemned or booked for any kind of sexual offense or anything like this. The supporters have risen up to say, oh, they are just being framed or whatever, and I think the supporters sort of then tend to sort of try and sublime the whole thing. But I don't think we can heed to that. I think it's really important to call out what it is for what it is. And that's it pretty much. It's quite black and white. The video is very obvious.
Tenzin, you didn't think it was black and white. You, in your public comments, as a Tibetan, it should be said, and therefore, you come from a different approach to this, perhaps. You have said that people are looking to foist a kind of sexualization of this. You've pointed, you tweeted this picture where you said that the Dalai Lama is often sort of playful. That's the argument you've made. There are others who've pointed to a Tibetan tradition of sticking your tongue out. But may I say, with respect, and I say this as someone who has loved the Dalai Lama all my life, so this is very disturbing for me as well. Sticking your tongue out is not the same thing as telling a child to suck it. Tenzin.
Yeah, namaste. I can absolutely understand what the two speakers earlier said, and I've been seeing this everywhere in the media. And as a Tibetan, and also someone who always looked up to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, as many millions of people around the world looked up to him, I can absolutely understand the outrage, the pain, and the hurt that are being expressed by so many different people. But we must also understand this from the point of view of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. This is a very cultural specific gesture. You see, in fact, in this video, we also see His Holiness the Dalai Lama touching each other's forehead. And cultural specific gesture where we pass on our fortune from the head to the other. And and when it comes to the earlier gesture that you talked about, I think it wasn't actually meant to be physical as it was said in the word. It was actually a gesture to express closeness and affection, and we should not go into it and understand it quite literally. His Holiness the Dalai Lama is a man of peace, and we all, Barkha, as you yourself said, we all love and always felt that this is a
Can I
man
ask you
who has
something? Can I
always
ask you?
led
Yeah,
us.
sorry. Can I ask you something? You say
Yes,
that this is culture specific, that we
yes.
are people coming in from the outside, that in a way it's a little bit like, that case that took place in Norway where, somebody decided that these were parents mistreating their children, whereas as Indians, for example, we have a different way of bringing up our parents. You're talking about that kind of cultural gap. But is it, and I ask this in ignorance, so please forgive me if I sound ignorant, is it traditional for young children to be kissed on the lips by elders? Is that traditional?
Well, kissing each other on the lips, even among adults of not being married or in a what is called physical love relationship, is quite normal in the Tibetan community. Even among, for example, fathers and daughters, or fathers and sons, it's quite normal in certain part of the Tibetan community, and it's not seen sexual. And but I can also understand, this is, we live in a very sexualized and commercialized world today. So therefore words like the ones that we are talking about did not actually mean sexual about 50, 60 years ago. His Holiness the Dalai Lama is 87 years old. He is in any way in such a situation where sexual feelings or all that actually meant nothing to him. He's been a celibate and a monk all his life, and therefore
Yeah.
he has actually become that symbol of love and peace. He did not mean any harm to anyone. He should be the last person to mean anything like this. He has
So,
given entire life for the world peace, and he did not mean anything even to a child, as we are talking about today.
okay, very, very differing sort of perspective. I just want to make the point, Tenzin, though, that being celibate and having desire has nothing to do with the abuse of power. We have to sort of underline that. both the child rights activists see this as an abuse of power. You see it as an innocent, non-sexual, traditional, playful gesture by a man who often interacts in this fashion. Mr. Azad, if this family were to go to the police, how would the police see it?
Well, I would say that it was definitely an inappropriate act. Um, the important point in POSCO Act, Section 11, is if there is a sexual intent. Now, to prove that, whether it was done out of sexual intent is a very gray area. As I'm talking strictly in legal terms for a man who's 87 years old, for a man who's a revered leader, including for me. But the gesture certainly was totally inappropriate, I would say. Now, if the child, his statement is taken before a magistrate, or if the child's parents feel that he has been hurt, there is a kind of trauma which has been caused to him, then sure, they have a right to register an FIR. But the only thing is, I would certainly say that during the investigation, it would be clear that to prove that part of sexual intent would be very, very difficult. So
Okay.
I would say certainly that it has tremendous, a social fallout. It's bad for the child, it's bad for the family, and if they file a complaint, certainly it has to be looked into. But if you look in the totality of it, I would say it was something which His Holiness would certainly regret, and he has.
Okay. And I guess the question then, Padma, is should the matter end there? In fact, that is our poll today for all of our members. Remember, Mojo Story is now opening up for members. If you'd like to take part in our programs, ask our panel questions, you can by becoming a member. Padma, is the apology sufficient? And, when I opened my program, I did talk about, the China dimension, and Shanta Sinha rightly said to me, that has nothing to do with anything. The only reason I mention it is I was following comments made by the Tibetan parliament in exile, and a number of them have made this argument that listen, you need to let this go now because otherwise this is just going to play to the advantage of powers that have tried to diminish and discredit the Dalai Lama. Is that the point here? Should that be the point here? Does it end with his statement? Shanta Sinha and Pooja say the apology is a non-apology. Tenzin has a very different perspective. Mr. Azad says wrong, but move on.
I don't think geopolitics plays a role here. As an admirer of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and I've interviewed him several times, I'm confused and embarrassed by this video. As a chronicler of past times, Barkha, and as a kid of the 70s myself, though, I must point out that the concept of what is inappropriate and what is not has itself changed over these decades. I mean, when we were kids, for instance, it was very common, and I'm a little older than you, it was very common for uncles and aunties, notwithstanding, to beckon cute kids and say, hey, come and sit on my lap, for instance. Now, this was not considered outlandish at all those days. Today, it would be unheard of. Similarly, the word spanking, it was also very common as a practice to chastise naughty kids in the 60s and 70s, and it was frequently depicted even graphically in American comic strips, about naughty kids. But today, again, it would straight away be considered child abuse. Now, as a mother myself, I'm thankful for all these changes that have come over the decades, and because they're primarily aimed at protecting children against sexual abuse, and there can be nothing said against that. But yet, like everybody else, I was appalled and uncomfortable to watch this video. But as an observer of what's going on today, Barkha, I often wonder, especially on the social media, where good sense ends and where wokeness begins. So we have to tread a very careful line. And as the police commissioner said, Mr. Azad, I think ultimately what will decide this matter, whether is what the parents feel, whether they register a complaint, and how do you prove sexual intent, because that seems to be a key point in what Mr. Azad
But
said.
as one of our members just said, whichever way you look at it, it looks bad. The point is, does it end here? Padma, my question to you is this: you make the important point about distinguishing between changing social mores and not slipping into wokeness. The uncle and aunties sometimes were innocent, sometimes they were child abusers. I mean, I just have to say this: those uncles who took children onto their laps, you sometimes found out 20, 25, 30 years later. Anyone who's watched Monsoon Wedding, this is now the stuff of sort of cultural cinematic truth. Padma,
Abs- Absolutely. That's why.
children don't recognize abuse as abuse when it's happening to them.
Yes,
That is the important
absolutely.
thing to say here, right?
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you. That's exactly why I said earlier in my comments that the changes that have come about to that lack of sensitivity towards child abuse, or even, a lack of knowledge that there was something as child abuse. I'm sure there was knowledge, but it was all suppressed in the 60s and 70s. I completely agree with you. Not all these uncles and aunties were innocent, of course. But what I'm saying is that thinking has evolved over the centuries, and to an extent, in some cases, as Mr. Azad said, it's ultimately up to the courts and up to the actual existing laws to decide in this case whether the Dalai Lama was innocent or not. But as far as the social mores are concerned, as far as thinking is concerned, it has changed for the positive. There has evolved a greater awareness
Yeah.
about sexual abuse against children, by all means, and that's to be welcomed, of course. There's no argument against that. What I'm
Well,
saying is that in some cases it also takes an extreme, which is possibly what Tenzing has been trying to outline, saying that in this case the intent was not there. In this case it's about an elderly gentleman who's 87 years old, and in this case, even if you claim there was sexual intent, there couldn't possibly be because he's been celibate, etc., etc. And as you then counter argued, that celibacy is not always a measure of a lack of sexual intent.
it's a disturbing and difficult conversation. I had to think a lot before deciding that this is a show we must have and host today. Before I come back to Tenzin and to the child rights activist, I want to go to Yashovardhan Azad for just one question. Suppose there's no complaint. Let's imagine for a moment, because my gut is the family will not come forward, the identity of the child will be concealed, and so on. Had this been a video of anybody else, somebody else in public life, less loved, less adulated, my sense is the state machinery would have kicked in on its own. The outcry would have been very different.
Barkha, in the POSCO Act, anybody who comes across an incident like this is supposed to report. So you're right. I didn't say it the first time deliberately.
Yeah.
And it does not have any time limit too. So in a case of an ordinary mortal, yes, this would have been brought to the fore, whether to the, in fact, the National Child Protection that commission, which is there, would have
Ms. Sinha was the founding member of it, the founding head of it, yes.
Yes, they would have acted suo moto. There's no doubt about it. And today's times, as very rightly said by my previous speaker, when things have become so alive, people have become so conscious about these rights and children's rights, for example, because, so many things are being exposed now which are not there during our times. I think this would have immediately been the flashpoint, I would rather say, instead of just kind of registration of a case.
Yeah. I keep thinking someone else on this video in public life, I can't even imagine there would have been suo moto action by the bodies who are set up to protect the rights of children. And I'll take that back to Shanta Sinha and Pooja in just a second. Tenzin, I have a different question for you. You're a young Tibetan. Young Tibetans have not always agreed with the Dalai Lama's methods in championing autonomy for the Tibetan people. But you've always respected him and admired him. When you first saw this video, were you disappointed? I understand that today maybe you feel the need to say that the Dalai Lama has been misunderstood. But when you first saw it, as a young man with awareness today on how this would be viewed, what did you think or feel?
Well, when I first saw it, I felt this would be misunderstood. The younger generation Tibetans are absolutely aware of, and we know in such a sexualized world we live in, and we are all very careful, and we love to we want to protect our children in any way from elders or many other abuses. But we must also understand this incident did not happen in a closet. It did not happen in a private meeting. It was a huge public gathering, and in front of everybody, this was happening. So in a way, again, this sexual intent cannot be there in front of entire people. He was actually showing this sign, this gesture of affection. So um, as the younger generation, these are the things we absolutely understand. But His Holiness the Dalai Lama doesn't understand in the way that is now being understood in a very sexualized world we live in, of that of the cinema and commercials and products that are being sold in the international community.
Okay. Okay, let me take this back to Shanta Sinha first. Shanta Sinha, the child rights body that you headed as the first head of this of such a body, has said nothing. And I think Mr. Azad is correct that it can issue a suo motu notice to the Dalai Lama. It's unlikely that it will. Uh, to this point that has been made again and again about intent, the intent isn't there. The intent of abuse is not there, because you have called it sexual abuse, and the counter has been again and again, he was inappropriate, but it was not intended as child sexual abuse. There was nothing sexual about it. What would you say to that, ma'am?
Let me just tell you, under the POXO Act, it is for the perpetrator of the crime to prove that there was no intent. So the burden of proof is with the perpetrator. So he will have to show why there was no sexual intent. So that is the problem, is not with the child to say, or you and me to say whether there was intent or not. It is for them, for say in this instance, Dalai Lama, to say that there was no sexual intent and to prove that. That is what it is under the POXO Act. Secondly, I thought the argument about tradition and culture, I think this argument is so status quoist. Anytime there is a conflict between tradition and culture and a child's right, I think the child rights should take precedence over tradition and culture, and new traditions, new cultures have to be established. Traditions and cultures cannot be frozen in reality. They have to be as dynamic as the society keeps changing. And especially with people like Holiness Dalai Lama, they must know what is happening in society around, what the discussions are about, what the debates are about, and they will have to be aware about even the discourse on children's rights when they come up with this kind of a tradition and culture, which is abhorrent.
As one of our audience members says, let the message go out that this was not normal behavior. That comment coming in from Saraswati Iyer, and she believes the parents must take the lead in that. Shanta Sinha, I must ask you before I go to Pooja, what should happen? What should happen now? Does the matter end for you here?
Certainly it does not end for me here. And I think if I were the chairperson of the NCPCR right now, I would have proceeded further on the issue and taken, as a police officer here had said, to suo motu cognizance of the case. It
Pooja, you want
cannot,
to?
and in fact, one will have to, in fact, send a message that the law is equal for all. The rule of law has to be equal for all, and I think that is why this case is very, very important. To say that it
Padma,
does not
yeah, I think
differentiate.
that's a very important point, because my own sense is I would be very surprised if any notices are issued, any FIRs are filed, if anything more happens. But Shanta Sinha says, Padma, and I'll come to you right after that, Pooja, that the rule of law has to be equal. Yasho Azad says anyone else by now suo motu notices would have gone out.
I agree that the rule of law, of course, has to be equal. That's that goes without saying. But I'm more, I just wanted to pick on what Tenzing said about culture specificity. I agree that there are culture specific things. I mean, we've all heard about the Tibetans and the way they use their tongue to greet each other or to greet people and all that. Though none of my Tibetan friends have ever done that. But what I'd like to know is, Tenzing, you pointed out touching the forehead like the Dalai Lama did in this video is normal, but surely not sucking one's tongue. I mean, that can't be culture specific. And besides that, you said that you pointed out that the Dalai Lama is 87 years old. uh, Younger Tibetans are aware of global social mores and norms and what's happening and how people would interpret something like that, whereas His Holiness would not. I beg to disagree, because His Holiness is an immensely well-known international figure. I can think of few celebrities and personalities who are this well-traveled. I mean, and he has been all over the world and he's revered all over the world. So I find that a little hard to. What I can accept is perhaps that he's growing very old, and that he has possibly forgotten. Possibly forgot where he is. He's in a public space. I think he's apologized, and I think we should let it rest. But I'd like to say one thing: his aides and his communication wing. Instead of being so overawed by the Dalai Lama themselves, I do feel that they should have they should be more alert, and they should be debriefing him, because as you said, we've all experienced him as being very spontaneous. He sometimes catches hold of your ear. He does things which are not normal in interactions with people, but nobody minds those, because those are not considered sexual
Yeah.
acts. So that's why I think that this thing about tradition, I don't know. I think he is getting on in years, and I think it's important that his aides and his communications wing should be
Tenzin,
helping
would you
him
agree?
get
Would you
on
agree
top of
that
that.
the apology is not, the apology is not really an apology. It's an apology that is qualified. It says, if this hurts somebody, I'm sorry, it wasn't intended like that. But to be fair, I don't know what else he could have said. He can hardly say this was meant as a sexualized gesture, or this was meant as a gesture of violation. Tenzin, what did you feel about this statement?
Absolutely. I think this is all that he could offer. That he did not mean any sexual intent. He did not mean to harm anyone, and hurt at the most, even the child, and even to entire world. He is actually saying that I am who I am. I'm very transparent. I am seen around the world of whatever he has been doing for 64 years, ever since he came into India, in the international world. We have seen him fall sick. We have seen him go to surgeries. We have seen him, missing his dates because he was in the hospital. We have all seen every bit of his life. He's transparent and as clear as it is. So there was no sexual intent in this, and it should be understood just that. He is so old. He's not even able to walk. He has to be taken today in a small vehicle,
Yeah.
as he comes from his palace to the public gathering. And we must also understand the children, they had come all the way from Delhi to Dharamshala to get the blessings of His Holiness, and also to receive his teachings. So you see, this is a group of people who are coming all the way to Dharamshala, knowing that the Tibetans are offering, especially from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the unique
No,
teachings of Nalanda, of love and compassion, that the
Tenzin,
Tibetans learned from
Tenzin,
India.
I can tell you that before this video, if you'd asked anyone, I speak for everybody here, that the Dalai Lama would have been among the public figures that we most admired. I think this has been disturbing for so many people, precisely because of the love and the respect that the Dalai Lama has evoked. He was seen to be a benign, compassionate, sort of inclusive agent, right, as it were, of spirituality. Just give me a second, Padma. We have a very interesting poll result. We asked our viewers, our members, if this apology is sufficient, and you might be surprised. There seems to be, when I looked at these results, can we bring them up? You'd be surprised at the response. Not one person actually thinks the sorry is sufficient. That's 100% people believing that this apology was insufficient. And I just want Pooja to come in on that, and then I'll take last comments. Pooja, do go ahead.
I think this has been such an interesting conversation and hearing everybody's views. I just want to reiterate that yes, I think behavior needs to be topmost, that we need to give importance to above culture, tradition, all of those. In a world where millions of children are getting sexually abused, the child rights perspective needs to be upheld. Children do not have a voice of their own as much as we adults do. And I think when we sort of try and see this in a different light, other than the seriousness of what has happened, then somewhere we're failing our children. And our children are not the future. Our children are our present. And it's important to recognize that. We all keep saying children are our future. No, they are our present. And if we don't protect them today, then we'll be really, really failing them. And I think that it's important to call this out in a very, very stringent manner, because I think condemning it will set an example that, this is not acceptable. And I think that is what a lot of us, and in fact all of us adults, need to do in this country, in the world, calling out these acts, saying this is inappropriate, this is not acceptable. Only then will we be able to really protect our children from any kind of abuse and violence. And there are far too many out there.
Yeah.
Our latest NCRB data of 2021 says there are 170 cases being registered of just sexual abuse every day. And that is only
Right.
the tip of the iceberg, right?
Children, and this is sexual abuse for
Yeah,
child
just sexual
sexual
abuse
abuse.
of children, child sexual abuse, 170 cases per day, according to the NCRB data of 2021.
And these are
And
the
there are
and these are the cases that get told. Think of the cases that don't get told.
exactly, which is why this is just the tip of the iceberg. And I
Uh,
feel that, when it is powerful leaders like this coming into the light for such things, it needs to be taken very, very seriously.
Shanta Sinha, ma'am, you said if you were heading the child protection panel today, you would have issued notices. That's not happened. In fact, we checked the Twitter feed of the body. There's complete silence. There's not even a public sort of condemnation or expression of concern from what we're able to tell on the official handles. Um, what do you think can happen now? It also needs to be underlined that the child will negotiate his reality with what happened maybe 10 years from now, maybe 15 years from now. The child may not instantly have an opinion on what's happened.
Certainly, again, as I said before, we will have to look at what the child is going through, and as you said, he may not really understand the full implications of it now, but it will, as all psychologists have said, it will hit him very powerfully. It has a profound impact on children, and we will have to take note of that. Also, there has to be at least a public debate, and I'm happy that there is a consensus through your poll that they say that it is shocking, that it is clearly an act of abuse. And I think this consensus must become wider. Then people get courage to say that even if it is His Holiness Dalai Lama, we will have to sort of point out fingers at him, at the perpetrator. And I think that is what is very important. It does not matter who. It is the child that we are talking about, and we have to protect the child. And there cannot be any more such acts of violence and abuse.
Yes. Tenzin, what is the conversation taking place within the community right now? I'd be curious to know about that.
Well, within the Tibetan community, this is first time we are facing so much of backlash, something that is related to our most respected and loved, leader of the modern times, and I'm unable to read the kind of comments and the statements that are coming from around the world, and we are all ill from deep inside and unable to digest these kind of things, because we do not look at His Holiness the Dalai Lama in the way it is seen from outside, and we actually understand how much he had given, not just to the Tibetans but people around the world. He had always stood for world peace, who always spoken up for freedom, and most importantly spoken for kindness, to care for each other.
Yeah.
And this is the last thing that should be understood in the way it is now being understood. It should not be seen quite literally as it is being shown on TV,
On the
or
media.
being understood in this way.
Mr. Azad, you were the first to make the point that so motor notices could have gone out. You're also a realist. I think none of us actually think that they're going to be FIRs and notices. And the only way this doesn't end here is if the family decides to speak, and we right now don't seem to see signs of that. This actually happened, from what I'm able to tell, a few weeks ago, and it's only been released. The video has been spotted, and therefore one has become aware of this. Do you believe it should end here? Because the child rights activists certainly believe it cannot and it must not.
Well, let me say at the very outset that as a person who in service was protecting Dalai Lama
Oh,
and who
really?
reveres, yes, and who reveres him as one of the greatest leaders. And in fact, my think tank organized a webinar the other day on Tibet, the anguish of people. And
Yeah.
like, MS Rao, I was myself absolutely shocked with this behavior.
Yeah.
But it is difficult for me to be convinced on the sexual intent part of it. That's number one. And number two, Barkha, this is not only an isolated, ordinary case. It certainly has geopolitical dimensions. There's no doubt about it. And therefore, there is a time to let it go. It's painful for the boy. I totally understand. I think we should now stop talking about it. But in the end, let me also congratulate you and the speakers for handling this debate so sensitively. I was expecting a lot of fireworks and kind of, but what you have been able to manage today, I must congratulate.
Thank you. But I must get responses to your comment of if there's a time to let it go, the geopolitics is important. The Dalai Lama has no pattern of this. Those are the points you're making. Padma, and then I'll give the last word to Shanta Sinha. Padma, do go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, two very quick last points, Barkha. Whether the child, we're talking about the child is traumatized, whether he is traumatized or not, whether he will be for sure in 10 years or not, really nobody can say for sure. There is a greater awareness of child abuse in schools nowadays, in society, thanks to organizations like Shantaji's and thanks to activists like Pooja. So perhaps this kid has discussed what happened on stage with his parents. I mean, he was visibly uncomfortable by what happened. We could all see that. We don't
Yeah.
know that. The second point is the social media. Even if the child was not traumatized, he certainly will be now with the kind of undue publicity on the social media that he's been getting.
Absolutely.
And staying on the social media,
That's
I'd
a
just
very
like to point
important
out,
point. Nobody's even
staying on the social
bothered to hide his identity.
Exactly. And staying on the social media, I'd like to point out one last thing. If the Dalai Lama were indeed a child abuser, given the fierce outreach of the social media for at least the past 15 years, 20 years, and the way a number of charlatans and, God men have been exposed on the social media precisely through videos like this, I think there is no way, and given the high profile nature of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I don't think there is any way that this aspect of his so-called sexual abusive nature would have come out a long time ago. And certainly with a little help from especially China, it would have been out for sure.
Absolutely.
I want to take that to Shanta Sinha in the end. That, given the adversaries that the Dalai Lama has, and if there was a pattern of behavior, and we've had that with, we've had child sexual abuse outed in the church, caught in movies like Spotlight. We've had cases at home, where there have been allegations against other religious leaders. This would have somewhere been in the headlines earlier. Some video like this would have released earlier. That's the point being made. One. Two, Mr. Azad is saying whether you like it or not, there is geopolitics stapled onto the tail of this. Ma'am, last word to you.
What do I say if again we are getting back to the original arguments? I thought we had defeated all those arguments by now.
No, I don't. I agree with you. I think the
Yeah.
child has to be at the heart of our conversation, but I must allow you to have the closing word on some of the counter arguments we've heard.
So,
Yes.
what again I would reiterate is let's not confuse issues. And whether there was precedence, whether it would have been sensationalized earlier, whether the current issues being sensationalized, I think these are irrelevant to the conversation that we are having now. We are talking about this specific instance of what has happened through the video, and we are discussing this instance, and we are not discussing earlier precedences and the kind of issue that has been raised. In law also you go by the case, you don't go by so many
And on
precedences.
the issue of intent, ma'am, what would you say on this repeated
uh,
issue of intent?
uh, I think till it is disproved, and that disproval has to come from, I mean, Dalai Lama, Holiness Dalai Lama himself. That yes, I did not have sexual intent, and why not that be the apology? In the apology, it could be a stronger worded apology, taking into consideration the kind of outrage that has occurred. I think that should actually come out of this kind of a situation. Yeah, this is what it is. So let's not confuse the issue. Let's and of course he still has a personality. He stood for peace. All of us admired him. In fact, in one of my flights on the where we shared, I wanted to go and even touch his feet. So let me tell you that we all admired him, but this was hugely disappointing what we had just seen in the video. And
Yeah.
I would not like to look at the totality of the person and condone this. That I would not like to do.
I think that is the bottom line. I agree with everything you've said. I think the Dalai Lama should issue a more specific statement, maybe come out and speak, because somewhere to have your whole life, in fact, sullied, and I think there Shantasena makes an important point. When a violation occurs, you can't say, well, you've been honest 99 times, so we won't consider this 100th violation. In fact, it hurts even more precisely because there has been that sort of expectation of you as a leader. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much. This has been a difficult conversation. We thank you all for being able to have it in a civil yet passionate and deeply felt way. To Tenzin, Padma, Yasho Azad, to Pooja, and to Shantasena, thank you so much for joining us as always. And to our audience, thank you so much for watching. Remember, 5 p.m. every day, you can tune in for a live stream of our program, Bottom Line with Barkha. We're also opening up a new program where you, as members of the Mojo Story community, can take part in our polls, can put questions on to our guests, to our newsmakers, can have first access to our big interviews, but become a member and hope to see more and more of you joining our community. We started Mojo right here in this basement. Just 4 people, 4. And now we're about to hit our first 1 million subscribers. So this is to say thank you to all of you for your support, for your respect, and for your encouragement. We've always gone to where the story is. During the pandemic, when television's big anchors were hunkered down in their studios or at their homes, we hit the road. We traveled from Delhi to Kerala, covering 30,000 kilometers in our small car, reporting from inside ICUs and inside slum tenements. Whether it's flash floods or war zones, we've always put our boots on the ground. In fact, we're just back from Punjab, tailing the Khalistani fugitive Amritpal Singh. And through all of this, we have always put you, the people, first. In an age of partisan polarized media where most journalists are either chamcha ya morcha, we believe the story is sacred and the truth of the story is what matters. And now as we get ready for the next step, we need your help. Become a Mojo member and get first access to all our big interviews. Get a chance to ask our newsmakers questions. Get a chance to write and report for us for both our website and our channels. And also, interact with me and my colleagues directly through AMA sessions. Literally, ask me anything. Click on the join now right next to the subscribe button, and yes, also subscribe if you haven't yet, and become a Mojo member for just 159 rupees a month. Hope to see lots of you in our community. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.